Good afternoon, everybody. I hope that you had a nice lunch. Welcome to the final session of the Netnod Spring Meeting 2017. I'm going to introduce the first speaker of the final session, and it's Nikolas Pediaditis. I hope I got the name right, from the RIPE NCC. Nikolas is an IP resource analyst and trainer at the NCC. He's responsible for managing the life cycle of internet number resources and managing the quality of the RIPE registry. He also delivers training courses on related topics. He's led a number of RIPE policy implementations, including the policies for V6, ASN, and inter-RIR transfers, and the provision of registry services to legacy resource holders. Okay. So, Nikolas, welcome to the stage.
Hello. Hello. Thank you. Today I will be talking about transferring and protecting IP addresses. However, for the colleagues that might not be familiar with who we are, what we do, I would like to start with a small introduction about the RIPE NCC. We are a regional internet registry. We are part of the internet registry system, and we are dealing with internet number resources. The map that you see and the organizations that you see on top is what consists the internet registry system today. Maybe you remember the presentation from Patrick from Netnod yesterday. He talked a bit about John Pastel. That's how things started, and this is pretty much how things evolved. 5 different regions in the world, 5 RIRs. We are responsible for the yellow part of the planet, let's say, that you see on this map. And we have ARIN for America, Afrinic for Africa, and so on. Our service region is Europe, the Middle East, and parts of Central Asia. We're an independent, non-for-profit membership organization. And right now we're counting a bit more than 15,700 members in 76 different countries. Our most prominent activity is to provide internet number resources to our members, that is IPv4 addresses, IPv6, AS numbers, and related services, and to support the infrastructure of the internet through technical coordination in our service region. Our region, the place that we live is quite diverse, 76 countries. For our region, this means different languages, different laws, different mentalities even. So we must be at all times neutral, impartial, open, and transparent towards everybody. And one thing to remember is that the policies that we follow, by policies, the RIPE policies, we mean the rules, are being decided by the RIPE community. So the RIPE community decides on policies, decides the rules to follow, and the RIPE NCC implements those rules and, let's say, enforce those rules. And the RIPE community is all of you guys. IPv4. I would like to start with having a look at the status of IPv4 right now. And I believe I don't bring you any news if I say that we are running out. We don't really have much IPv4 left. And how much that is, you can see in this graph that represents the available IPv4 pool of the RIPE NCC right now. This is what we have left. Right now, we are approximately at 0.8/8. And maybe some of you remember or know that in 2012, the RIPE NCC announced that we reached our exhaustion point. This meant at that time that we only had 1/8 left in our pools to distribute. And now you might say, okay, it has been 5 years since 2012. Did we only burn through 0.2 of that /8? Well, not really. If you really want to see what happened to that /8, you need to look at the dark green part of the graph. So right now, we have approximately 0.25 of that /8 left, so 1/4. And we have distributed already 3/4 of that /8. We have more than that simply because through these years, some IP addresses have been returned to our pools. And we also received some bits and pieces from IANA, the last scraps, let's say, that were left there and were distributed to all the RIRs. We did a projection because at the same time, the number of our members is growing. And according to the current trend and how we distribute IPv4 addresses, we expect our pools to last for another 4 years. The RIPE community placed a policy in place 5 years ago when we reached our exhaustion point. The intention of that policy was to save some IPv4 space so everybody can have a little piece, even the newcomers, most importantly for the newcomers in this market, for everybody to get a small piece of IPv4 until everybody can transition to IPv6. So in 2012, the RIPE community put a policy in place according which every member of the RIPE NCC can receive one final /22. And that goes for both old and new members. At the same time, some people starting abusing the policies. And then again, in order to restrict speculation, the RIPE community put a restriction in place according to which if you get an IP block either from the RIPE NCC or from somebody else, you need to stick with it for 24 months. So you cannot transfer it to somebody else for 24 months since you received it. The thing is that we don't have much IPv4 left. However, you guys still need IPv4 and companies still need IPv4 because unfortunately, not everybody is fully on IPv6 yet. So what do? You cannot get more from the NCC apart from that last /22. You can do a transfer, and this is what organizations do these days. So what can be transferred? IPv4 allocations can be transferred. IPv4 allocations are the big IP blocks that you get from the RIPE NCC, but those can only be transferred between members. IPv4 provider independent assignments can be transferred. Those are IP blocks that have been given to end users, and they usually have a sponsoring LIR. And those can be transferred between members and non-members. Legacy space can be transferred, although there is no RIPE policy for transfers of legacy space. However, it's still IP space, so it's being transferred. And the RIPE NCC can update the RIPE registry to reflect the changes. So basically, following a transfer of legacy space, we can update our registry to reflect who is the legitimate holder of this IP space. And also, we have inter-RIR transfers. This is a relatively new thing. It's a policy that was implemented last year, so we're doing them for over about a year. And what they are, it's basically organizations from an RIR being able to transfer IP addresses to an organization in another RIR. So a Swedish company can transfer IP addresses to a company in US. And those are only possible between RIRs that have compatible policies. And right now, those are the RIPE NCC, ARIN, and APNIC. And where can you look for transfers? If you are a member of the RIPE NCC, there is a tool for you called the Transfer Listing Service. You can access it through the LIR portal. For the colleagues that might not be familiar with the LIR portal, LIR portal is the interface with which the members of the RIPE NCC can manage their accounts. Transfer Listing Service is accessible via this portal. And basically, it's an interface to bring together demand and offer. So if you are a member and you have excess of IPv4, you can list it there. And another member that needs IPv4 can list that need, and then you get in touch with each other and you perform a transfer. It increases transparency because you can see who they are, they can see who you are. And we also have a list of recognized brokers on our website. This is a list of brokers that have signed an agreement that they will follow and respect RIPE policies and the procedures of the RIPE NCC. By no means the RIPE NCC endorses those brokers or has any special relationship with them, but they have signed an agreement that they will play by the rules. And one thing that we would like to stress out is that the RIPE NCC is not a party in any commercial agreement or any financial transaction. So for us, transfers happen. We see resources going from A to B, and we care about the resources and we care about you. Your financial transactions is your business. We don't need to know. Let's take a look at some stats to see how big this is becoming. This is all the completed IPv4 transfers within the last, let's say, 1 year. The trend is pretty stable from month to month. We can see some spikes. So for example, we can see that in October, the size of transfers was quite big, a bit more than /12. I believe this is 1.5. And for example, in December, the blue column is the number of transfers, so the number of requests, and the red column is the size of transfers, how many IPs. For example, in December, we processed more than 350 transfer requests of multiple blocks, could be each one of them. And then we took a focus in this region. So we wanted to see what is happening in these countries around us. So basically Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, and Sweden. They are listed in alphabetical order, so there are no fights. You see 3 columns for each country. Blue is for incoming, so for IP addresses that are coming into the country from organizations in another country. A red column is for IP addresses that are transferred within that country, and the green one, the outgoing ones. So it's interesting to see, for example, that Denmark seems to be exporting more IP addresses than getting in. So apparently there is some excess of IPv4 in Denmark, and organizations are transferring more IPs to organizations in other countries. Finland, on the other hand, is mostly performing transfers within the country, so from companies that are within Finland. Iceland is quiet. It seems that they have what they need, which is great. And we can see a pretty similar pattern between Norway and Sweden. And that is bringing more IPs into the country than out, or transfers within the same country, which is interesting to see. Inter-RIR transfers, they are really picking up nowadays. You can see on the top the incoming ones, and on the bottom the outgoing ones. The main trend that we see is that more IPs are flowing towards our region than out. It's really big difference. And the vast majority of the transfers is between ARIN and the RIPE NCC. And if you want to have an overview of the trend of what's going on, in this graph you see the IP addresses that have been transferred in total within every RIR of the 3 that participate in inter-RIR transfers. So ARIN, since the beginning of transfers, within ARIN, 69 million of IP addresses have been transferred. RIPE NCC comes second with 29.6 million, APNIC third with 15.1 million. And what's interesting to see is that ARIN and APNIC, they are performing inter-RIR transfers for 4 to 5 years now, if I'm not mistaken. The RIPE NCC participates in inter-RIR transfers for the last 1 year and 3 months. And there has been already 4.2 million addresses transferred from ARIN to the RIPE NCC, when for all the previous years, double of that has been transferred from ARIN to APNIC. So since the RIPE NCC joined inter-RIR transfers, the numbers have increased a lot. What is our role in these transfers? Our ultimate goal is to run an accurate and up-to-date registry. This is important because the registry is being used by network operators to make proper and correct decisions, and even law enforcement agencies and regulators. And at the same time, we support the resource holders, and that's mostly you, throughout the entire transfer process. So we run due diligence checks to make sure that things will go right and you will not be tricked into something, let's say. And we're trying to protect the resources that are so valuable to you. And I'm talking about protecting IP addresses. And the reason is that not everybody in this world is a nice person, and not everybody is playing by the rules. And since IPv4 is becoming more and more scarce, IPv4 addresses have gained value these days. And there are some people that see IP addresses and they think about networks, and there are people that see IP addresses and they think about money. And there is legitimate ways to make that money, and there are no legitimate ways to make that money. So it's quite important that you protect your resources. Consider this scenario. Imagine that tomorrow you go in the office and part of your network is down. Maybe your online services are not accessible. And then you do some troubleshooting, and nothing is really wrong with your infrastructure, but you see that somebody else is announcing your IP space. Maybe you contact this somebody else and you say, hey, that's my IP block, why are you announcing it? Stop. And then maybe the response you will get is, no, it's not yours, it's mine. Then you freak out. You query the RIPE database, and you see another company's name under your IP block. And then you call the RIPE NCC and you start shouting. And we understand. But think about this scenario. Any of this can happen, or all of the above. What do you do then? What would you be able to do? These things, unfortunately, are happening more and more, and we even had to come up with a definition for hijacking, because that's what just happened to you. Your resources have been hijacked. And that is taking control of issued internet number resources under false pretenses. Again, IPv4 becomes scarce, so it becomes valuable. And criminals or hijackers, nowadays, they use very sophisticated methods to take control over what at least seem to be unused resources. They fake registration and identity papers. We receive false company registration papers these days. We receive fake passports. They fake entire websites and domains. We have cases where a company has gone bankrupt 1, 2, 3 years ago, and suddenly we receive a transfer request for resources that belong to that company. And we see registration papers issued by the national authorities, and we see a signature from a director of that company that does not exist. And then maybe we start investigating, and we see even the website that is on again, magically. It's a dummy website. The links are not working, but the logo is there. Sometimes we see that the domain has been re-registered to somebody. Sometimes that happens the same day that they send us an email for a transfer. So these things happen. It's not science fiction. They really happen. And that's why we're trying to raise awareness. And one thing we observe is that hijackers often target resources with outdated contact details. We see an increase in disputed transfers. We have sometimes even members disputing a transfer between each other. Common reasons are because, again, outdated contact information, an LIR contact no longer working for this company, but nobody bothered to get him out of the LIR account, so that person was still authorized to contact the RIPE NCC. And we have hijacked and disputed entire LIR accounts. We have seen LIR contacts removing everybody else, so they can act without anybody else being notified. And we see LIR accounts being opened on behalf of unaware organizations. So it's like me tomorrow trying to open an LIR as Netnod. It doesn't make any sense, but it happens. And sometimes it's pretty obvious because we all know some companies, but we are a big region. We have thousands of people dealing with it. So sometimes it's not really easy to see or to realize that a company does not exist or already exists. And we do see an increase in efforts to hijack legacy space. And the reason is that legacy space, a vast majority of it, has been left outside any relationship with the RIPE NCC. Nobody cared to update the data in the RIPE database. And there are IP blocks sitting there untouched for years. So people see that and they try to target that, because it's easier to fake that you are somebody else when nobody has touched an object for 20 years. What actions have we taken as RIPE NCC within the last 2 years alone? Just to give you an idea of how big or small that issue is. Within 2016, 64 investigations have been concluded, and we have 80 new cases that we investigate. Some of the outcomes, if we can, let's say, measure somehow the outcome of all this, within those investigations, we have rejected 24 LIR applications. So 24 times somebody applied to become a member of the RIPE NCC, and we did not accept it because the application was based on false information. 5 LIRs have closed down because of some major, let's say, fraud, because they committed something really bad. 4 times we have issued final warnings. Final warning means that we issue a warning to a member saying that if you do this again, then we need to close you down. And this is normally due to a major policy violation or a violation of the standard service agreement. And of course, when an LIR closes, that means that all the internet number resources, they come back to the free pools. And we have deregistered 17 provider-independent IP blocks. So what can we do as RIPE NCC? We can do more thorough checks. We understand that this will result into more time for evaluating your requests, but it's for your own protection. And that's why we kindly ask you to cooperate with us and to supply any required documentation. We don't ask for them just for the fun of it. We will investigate any reported hijack, and IP space can be returned in some cases, but it's not always possible. Sometimes it's really, really difficult to return IP space to the company that actually lost it. Investigations can take a long time, and they might require legal actions. You might need to go to court with somebody to solve this. We have improved our audit activities, and we want and try to be more in contact with you as much as we can. You will receive emails from us sometimes with questions, or might even phone calls with cases that might be related to you. You will receive sooner or later an email for an assisted registry check. Please don't ignore it. This is the exact reason why we do it. We want you to have your details up to date, both in our internal tools, let's say the LR portal, but also in the RIPE database. And we want to be in contact with you more. So that's why we do these presentations, that's why we do training courses and so on. What can you do? Ensure that you verify your details in the LR portal and keep your records in the RIPE database up to date, always. Don't assume that if you created something 6 years ago, it's still good, or that you don't need to touch it again. If you have a colleague leaving your company and you have authorized this colleague to act on your behalf in the communication with the RIPE NCC, and that colleague leaves the company, please update your details. And if you're acquiring resources, if you are performing transfers, always make sure that you are in contact with a legitimate holder, and especially if that's legacy space. And at the same time, make sure that the person you are dealing with is authorized. The fact that you are talking to somebody who works for a company that is transferring IP space to you doesn't mean that this person is authorized to sign a transfer agreement or to sign on behalf of this company. Check your information at regular intervals, and if there has been changes, please let us know. If your company name has changed, please let us know. If your phone number has changed, or the people that you have authorized to deal with your resources have changed, please let us know. And if you have any doubts, if you have any concerns, it's better to contact us before or during the transfer rather than after, because it might be too late. And finally, last but not least, there is a very last thing that you maybe we can all do, and that might make this problem much smaller and leave it to the past. We can deploy IPv6. Thank you.
So we have 5 minutes for questions. Any questions for Nikolas about the RIPE NCC? Yep, question at the back.
Hi, my name is Hamad. I'm from iVivid here in Stockholm. I wanted to just mention that, I mean, we have been subject to one of these very severe frauds in the past 2 months. And because I've been in touch with RIPE NCC, what you guys are doing is nowhere near sufficient for blocking sophisticated attacks on LIRs. People manipulate emails, do a lot of, nobody called us, nobody took, seriously, like, submitted forged, signature, which has nowhere, near the appearance of the original signature. It just went through, we lost the IPs, shebang, and we are now being told by the RIPE to go and sue somebody. So that's, it's, yeah, you need to do more. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, this is something that we hear sometimes, and thank you for bringing it up. And the thing that we keep repeating is that there is so much that we can do. We are not the police. There are limits that we can go to. And we're trying to stress out that every member is responsible for its own resources and for keeping its registry accurate. If something happens based on fraudulent documentation, if somebody breaks the law, we can report a violation, but we are not the police. There is we work within limits and we can react within limits. So we can support our members, we can do the due diligence checks as much as we can, but we can go up to a point, unfortunately. That's why we are trying to raise awareness and make everybody understand that prevention is better than trying to act after something bad has happened.
I saw some hands raised earlier. Can we take the microphone to Lehman, please?
Hi, Lars Lehman from Netnod. This is a comment, not as much a question to you as well, I can turn it into a question. You mentioned when you spoke about transfers between organizations and regions that you saw more IPv4 addresses going into Sweden than out of Sweden. And my interpretation of that is that there's still a lot of IPv4 being deployed and too little IPv6 being deployed. Would you agree with that assessment?
Without having definite numbers about it, because it's really difficult to measure, but yes, unfortunately we're not there yet. And I think it's a common understanding that we are not running towards IPv6 maybe as fast as we should.
Thank you. So then I can just, again, reinforce what Michael and Olle said before in the previous presentation where they discussed deployment of IPv6 and the lack thereof. Get going.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, time for one quick final question, if there is any. No? Well then, thank you very much, Nikolas.
Thank you.
So we have our second joint presentation of the day. And while the next presenters get mic'd up, I'm going to introduce them. The first is Johan Hübner from Delphi law firm. Johan specializes in IT law and commercial law, with a particular focus on distribution and agency law issues in fields ranging from industry manufacturing, retail and fashion, and online services. He has extensive experience in advising on data protection and information security matters, including cross-border transfer of data and compliance programs. And Erika Hammar, also from Delphi law firm. She's an associate in the firm's corporate group and TMT IP group and specializes in the TMT sector, in particular outsourcing agreements, data protection issues, and cloud computing agreements. She has extensive experience from working in matters related to outsourcing and cloud services for banks and other financial institutions. And today they're going to be talking about new general data protection regulation and introduction. So when you guys are ready, please take the stage.
Hello and good afternoon on this last day of this conference. Thanks for having us, talking about the pain and misery that new legal development will bring to most companies and people when it comes to the raised requirements on integrity and data protection and so on. See if this works. We're going to talk to you about the new general data protection regulation and also give you a bit of background, why this is really not something new. It's just something, an extension of something that's been in existence since 1998. And also a bit more about what you need in the event that you process personal data, what you need to consider going forward. I'm also going to talk about the dreaded sanctions that everybody's just talking about. And really a bit more sort of what to do to be compliant. And we should just start out by saying we don't believe that any company can be 100% compliant with this regulation. If they do, they've introduced so many, to say, security controls, processes, documentation, so we honestly, as lawyers, think it would be really impossible to run a normal business. So that's also something to bear in mind. But we'll start out with a bit of background, and I'm going to hand the baton to Erika.
Yes, so today we have the Personal Data Act applicable in Sweden, which is based on the Data Protection Directive from '95. This act includes provisions entitling the Data Protection Authority and the authorities to impose sanctions on companies that violate rules. But in practice, there have been few sanctions imposed upon companies violating the rules. It has rather been a question of losing goodwill for the companies.
The highest sanction actually been given in Sweden is 50,000 Swedish kroners, which is really nothing compared to what will be coming.
But then we have the new regulation, which will be direct applicable in Sweden and all other EU member states. And it will replace the Personal Data Act, the current legislation in Sweden. And the objective of this regulation is to ensure a high level of protection, data protection within EU, and to improve the freedom of the trade of services and products within EU. And as Johan mentioned, this will apply. The rules will apply as from 25th of May next year. And I can also mention that the provisions are sort of general and widely phrased. So there will be guidelines issued from the Article 29th party giving guidance in how to apply the rules and how to be compliant. Well, in short, it will be one regulation to rule them all. And the principle in the regulation are based on current law, as Johan mentioned, the directive. But there will also be a large number of news, which we will get back to later in our presentation. There will also be some possibilities for discrepancies in national law, but that will only be from certain rules. One example is the employment law area. And this regulation shall be interpreted uniformly throughout EU, which is sort of the purpose and the intention with this regulation. I can mention that the directive has been implemented in sort of 28 different ways. So this is one of the main purposes of this new regulation. And it will also apply to all processing of data. Today we have an exemption in the Personal Data Act in 5th A paragraph, clause 5th A. This exemption regards unstructured materials. So, for example, running text in emails have until next year been exempted from the Personal Data Act. But from May next year, this exemption will no longer apply.
So what is personal data? Which is, I should say, one of the bigger questions, one of the sort of the big definitions. Under the current regime, as Erika mentioned, the directive has been implemented basically in 28 different ways, which means that the definition of what personal data actually is has been interpreted in many, many different ways in many different member states. And Sweden, given that we're speaking as Swedish lawyers, has taken a very, I should say, militant approach, saying that, for instance, an IP address in itself will be considered personal data, regardless of whether you, as the processor, can link that to an individual or a household or an individual computer or anything like that. Regardless of that, an IP address has been considered in a court case as personal data, which is, from our perspective, going a bit too far. In the new regime, obviously we're going to have a harmonized interpretation of this, and there's also been some court cases regarding this, where, you, for instance, if you take the IP address as a very good example, it says if you are processing IP addresses and you have the legal means to actually tie that to other pieces of information that can be sort of directly and indirectly attributed to an individual person, then that will be a personal data as well. But it's the legal means that's the most important thing. You can tie that information to other information that you got and link that to an individual. Basically, but the definition, which is sort of in top there, it's a very, very, very wide definition. I'd say that most data that is processed by companies today will be considered personal data in some way or another, just because most data can be, it's directly or indirectly, can be tied or linked to an individual. So that's why this is really sort of important. So given the three examples that we got, an email address, obviously, the picture is also obviously personal data. The IP address is such, well, we'll see what happens. A telephone number, an address, or something like that, that will all be considered as personal data. And the next issue is, what do you mean by, just sort of, well, there you go. I can take that one.
Sorry.
And it's also something that our clients quite often ask us, but I'm just storing personal data. They even say, I store it encrypted. Does that really mean that I'm processing personal data? Yes, it is. Because any kind of handling of data that is defined as personal data will be considered as processing for the purposes of the regulation. So collection, registration, storage, just plain storage, obviously processing, disclosure to other third parties, and even sort of deletion of data will be considered as processing as such, the regulation. And so the next step in this test, whether or not you can process the data, is that there are some I should say, certain sort of levels that you need to pass. And the fundamental principles for being able to process personal data is that you do it in a lawful way, you do it fairly and transparent to the registered people. And you can only process data if you have a specified, explicit and legitimate purpose. There's a principle that applies way through the regulations that you should process as little data as possible. The data minimization principle is applied even all through. The data needs to be accurate, which is, I know, is a big problem for many clients. And you have to maintain integrity and confidentiality in your processing. So the next question is, when is processing permitted? And I'm handing over to Erika again.
Yes, so when you have passed these fundamental principles, you must ask yourself whether you have a legal ground to stand on when it comes to processing. So only if you can if you can rely to any of these legal grounds, then the processing of personal data is lawful. And one legal ground is informed consent, which is, I would say, one of the most common grounds. Then another one is if it's necessary for the performance of a contract to which the data subject is a party. That's important. So it can't be a contract between a company and a third party. A third legal ground is that it's necessary for compliance with a legal obligation. For example, an employer who must pay pensions and salaries.
But also telcos storing traffic data.
Yeah.
It's one of those.
If it's necessary in order to protect the vital interest of the data subject, that's another legal ground. To be honest, I haven't seen it. I haven't applied it. And if it's necessary for the performance of a task carried out in the public interest, is another legal ground, which may be public research and similar things. And sort of the last legal ground is a balance of interests. So if the legitimate interests of a company who wants to process personal data, if these interests override the interest of the data subject, the processing will also be permitted. So I mentioned consent as one legal ground, and the requirements for obtaining a legally valid consent will to some extent be stricter in the regulation compared to today in the Data Protection Act. The consent must be freely given, specific, informed, and unambiguous from the data subject. It may be verbally or in writing, but a new principle in the regulation is the accountability principle, which means that you will have to be able to show that you are compliant and that you have thought of these rules. Why we always recommend that consents are obtained in writing. And a request for written consent shall be presented in a manner which is clearly distinguishable from the other matters. And this requirement means that you cannot include the consent in general terms and conditions. So it must be specific and a specific indication, like sort of a separate box to tick. And another thing is that you must assure that that the consent covers all the purposes that you have informed the data subject that you are processing the personal data of. So you cannot. You have to obtain a separate consent from each. For each purpose, if you want to process the personal data for a new purpose, for example.
So, why do we really have to care? I told you about that the previous sort of sanctions on the Swedish law has been, I should say, minimal, but this is changing. The EU has decided that integrity is a very, very important thing, so they've raised the bar on the sanctions, taking it up to where the competition law fines has been over a number of years. So basically, you have two sets of fines that you can be sort of levied, and it's really what kind of breach of the regulation that you've been committing. So more, I'd say, minor breaches, then you have up to 10 million euros or 2% of the total worldwide annual turnover as a fine. We're still talking about quite big amounts. But then comes the, I should say, the blockbuster, or the thing that we're really afraid of, which is number 2, up to 20 million euros or 4% of the total world for things like having incorrect consent, as Erika just went through, or basically storing data for too long, not deleting it when you don't have any purpose of having it more, or transfers outside the EU that you don't have the legal grounds of doing. So many, I mean, these are fairly, I shouldn't say minor breaches, but they're very, very easy to commit. And I sort of should say that most of the clients that we're working with are doing something in that bracket, and I guess that most of you are as well, because, well, that's the nature of processing data. So this is something why people really care, why this is such a big thing talking about. This is the fines. But when you talk about the fines, there's also other sanctions. For instance, if I am in a sort of big block of personal data that's been breached, I may have a claim for damages because of the pain and suffering that I've due to this integrity breach. So I might have a claim for damages as well. In Sweden, basically the damages will be determined according to national law, and in Sweden the damages for these kinds of breaches are quite low, but still, if you have a database of 500,000 names and you have to pay 1,000 kroners to each of them, it's just going to be sort of significant amounts of money for fairly sort of small things. So this is why people really care. So what do you need to do?
Having gone through these rules, one thing to consider is whether you are a controller of the processing of personal data or not. And a controller is the person who, alone or together with others, determines the purposes and means of the processing of personal data. So the key here is whether you determine the purpose of the processing or not. And it's always the controller who is responsible for being compliant with the rules under the regulation. I will come to that on the next slide, but you are the one responsible for example, the IT systems you use, and not the IT supplier. The IT supplier will rather be the processor of the processing, which is a natural legal person who processes personal data on behalf of the controller. And one example is cloud service providers who are granted access to personal data. So when you have established that, and when you have considered whether you are a controller or processor, you must assure that you have a data processor agreement in place, which will regulate the relationship between the controller and the processor. And sometimes, I can mention that, sometimes both parties can be the controller and the processor, each other's processor and controller, depending on who is, or if both are determining the purposes of the processing. And this catalog of requirements for the content of the data processor agreement is much more extensive now than compared to today. Another thing to consider, especially in cloud services world, is that the legislation cannot be circumvented by transferring personal data outside of EU. So you must be aware where the personal data is stored or otherwise processed, which means that if you have, for example, a support service in India, that means that personal data will be transferred to a third country, which requires a specific legal ground. And also, even though you are compliant, you have a legal ground and for processing the personal data, and you fulfill the fundamental principles, you must always inform the data subjects of the processing. So the regulation will mean that you have to update your information, the information text provided to the data subjects. And yeah, I will sort of rush.
Yeah, there's also a lot of, as we said, this is the existing regime, but a bit sort of doped up. So what has been sort of added is lots of security requirements and requirements on systems. And up till now, we've basically gone through what do you need to do to ascertain that the data you process right now is, do you do that in a compliant way? But going forward, there's lots of sort of requirements that are set forth. So basically, sort of companies needs to implement properly technical and organizational measures to be able to handle data breaches and be able to handle all these sort of administrative routines. And this may involve, and this is sort of obvious for you, involve encryption, of course, which is just sort of a layer of protection. Encrypted data is still personal data. And also different kind of monitoring systems that needs to be in place. But there's also a principle of proportionality. If you are a company that basically are not handling sort of important customer information or important sort of private individuals and so on, maybe the measures that you need to take is slightly lower than, for instance, a gaming operator or a bank, for instance. There's also a couple of new principles that have been sort of introduced when it comes to sort of new systems. The two principles is privacy by design and privacy by default, saying that when designing new systems and when sort of modifying old ones, personal data and privacy needs to be at the forefront, needs to be at the pinnacle of that design work. It's that you only, as we were talking about data minimization before, you only process the personal data that you need to carry out what you're doing. And also, these systems needs to facilitate that you have access to the data that you're processing, that you're able to correct it, and also that you're able to delete everything. Because one of the principles of this is that a data subject has always a right to have his or her personal data deleted in your systems, in your processors' systems, and even more crazy, in your backup systems, which I've been talking to lots of sort of more technical-minded people than I am. They say, well, that will probably ruin the integrity of that backup if you need to go through the data that is in there. You probably know this already, but that's what I've been told. So that requirement is very, very difficult to live up to, and that's, I mean, goes along the line where we said it's really, really difficult to be 100% compliant with this. But the right to be forgotten is a sort of unequivocal right for a person to go to somebody that processes data and say, please delete me. And basically, this is the, I should say, the chart that you need to consider. Somebody come and ask for delete the data, And then you, as a processor, need to do I have a legitimate basis to keep the data? For instance, do I have a legal requirement, like sort of accounting rules or anything like that, that needs to keep certain data? Yes, then I can keep it. If I don't have that anymore, we don't have a continuing relationship or anything like that, then that data should be deleted, and it should be deleted everywhere, which can be fairly difficult. So there's also lots of things that needs to be done if you have a data breach. And this is, just to give a bit of background to Erika's slide here, the notification and data breach is something that is new to Sweden, but it's been implemented in many other European countries, even under the directive. So that's something why people talk about it.
Yeah, and as you can see, the time limits for when you must notify the supervisory authority are pretty short. You must no later than 72 hours after having become aware of the breach, notify a personal data breach to the authority. And you must also notify every data subject of a data breach, even though there are some exemptions, and even though this rule apply if it's likely to result in a high risk of the rights and freedoms of national persons, as it is stated in the regulation, even though that is pretty vaguely phrased. But this is something that the organizations must have in place, routines for how to notify the data protection authority of data breaches. And it should also be mentioned that a data breach could be pretty much, it could even be forgetting a laptop
in an airport.
In public, public space.
And I mean, something that we've been sort of considering, in Sweden we have Datainspektionen, and we don't even think that they have administrative sort of powers to be able to handle these notifications. From a budgetary means they've given they're given an additional sort of 1.5 million SEK to handle the new requirements. And since they're understaffed from the beginning, you can imagine how much they can do with that. Basically, what are we doing and what should you do? I mean, privacy is now a question for top management. It's a board matter since the sanctions are pretty high. And it's become, due to the sanctions, obviously more important to comply with this regulation and the law. And I mean, we've had the sort of reputational risks issues before, and given the higher sanctions and given the priority this has gotten in society, the goodwill sort of risks are definitely much higher as well. Some systems and databases used by several organizations might be illegal as they are. Might need to be either scrapped or heavily modified to be able to handle the requirements for privacy by design and default. So this is something that most organizations need to budget, and it's not money that you are spending to make your business more profitable. It's just sort of a compliance issue. And what we're doing right now with lots of clients is doing GDPR projects, where we do sort of a big due diligence of any kind of databases, what kind of personal data is processed, how the consent looks, all the documentation requirements, and so on. And from there, we're taking that to what are the steps that need to be taken to ensure sort of the highest level of compliancy. But basically, in your organizations, you need to have somebody, or if you're in charge yourself, learn and apply and comply to these changes. And also look at your contractual counterparties that process data for you. Do they comply? How to structure liability issues and so on. Very, very important. And basically, we'd like to sort of stop there. This is something that's really difficult to cover in 30 minutes because it's a fairly, I should say, a complex and very vaguely formulated regulation that even we lawyers struggle to understand. But now I hope that we're giving you, I should say, a crash course, so to say, in what's going to be new and what you need to sort of consider if you have these kinds of issues. So, thank you for listening to us for this half an hour.
Okay. We have time for a couple of very quick questions. I see two already. Can we bring the microphone first here, please?
Hello, this is Magnus Sandberg at Netnod. I know that in some other regulations, there is the difference as me as a private person or when I represent my employer. Is there any difference here, or is my name always protected by this, even if it's I doing things, signing a contract for my employer or whatever, or my email address is used in the business?
It's still personal data. So you will be, as a private person or a person acting for your employer, sort of protected in the same manner. But one thing that sort of slightly, I should say, related question is, does this apply to private processing that I do as a private person? And that's actually exempted. So the fines, you're not sort of subject to the fines as a private person.
And another question about the possibility to be forgotten. I mean, more or less every company has this Excel spreadsheet with addresses for sending Christmas cards or whatever.
Yeah.
So I guess that if I would like to be forgotten in some other company, they have to go through all these Excel spreadsheets and find my name and remove it if the Christmas card is already sent away.
Yes.
Yes, unless they have a legal ground to use.
For instance, if you've sort of entered into a contract with them that they should send you a Christmas card every year, then they need your address to actually be able to fulfill that contract. Just to take a very simple example. More questions?
Okay, we have time for one quick question.
Hello, I'm Lars from IDG. As all regulations overrule Swedish laws, right? But not constitutional laws.
That is something, I mean...
Because what about the offentlighetsprincipen?
Yeah. As some of you may know, there's been quite a lot of companies in Sweden that have been relying on a frivilligt utgivningsbevis, it's called. Basically, they've been applying to be a publisher of like a newspaper or a TV channel or something, to be protected under the yttrandefrihetsgrundlagen, which is one of our sort of 4 constitutional laws. And that means that they've been exempted under the current data protection regime, the personuppgiftslagen. That will probably not apply anymore because the regulation is, in many respects, of higher priority than our constitutional laws. Because we've entered the EU and we've submitted some legislative powers to the EU, which we are under obligation to fulfill. So this might be, so we have to make changes to our constitutional laws due to this. But it's still very unclear.
Okay, I'm afraid we have to wrap up now. Can you thank once again for a very interesting presentation? Thanks so much.
Thank you.
So we're coming to the final presentation of the Netnod meeting. And while our final presenter gets mic'd up, I'll introduce him. It's Jörgen Städje, science journalist and technical writer. Jörgen has a lifelong interest in technology, focusing on computers and radio technology. He regularly writes articles about science for science and computer magazines and has written a bestseller in Sweden about novel netware. So,
Hello.
There we go.
Ella 8 PV, calling the world on shortwaves. Store this stuff somewhere. So. Okay. on. All right. I guess you're all pretty bored with network-related information by now, so let's have something completely different, completely irrelevant. If you don't know me, I'm Jörgen Städje, technical journalist of 28 years back. I have written some 1,500 techie articles on all subjects you could wish for, and I intend to continue doing that. Let's see if it's the space bar. Yes. Silicon carbide, the new hot semiconductor, which you will probably encounter in one way or the other, perhaps when flying a jet airliner. This is what it's all about. Electronics so hot that it would melt soldering tin. But this picture is a bit of a fake. I did it by combining a visible and an infrared image. The whole thing actually glows cherry red. Can you imagine that? Electronics working while glowing. The slightly darker square is an... I thought you were good at this. Now then, okay? The slightly darker square, if you can see it in the middle of the red hot plate, is an operational amplifier chip. It works as a charm at 400 degrees and even better at 500 degrees. Silicon carbide works, looks and smells like ordinary silicon, only better. We need processors. The Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm is on its way to make processors, camera arrays, transmitters, amplifiers that work at 500 degrees Celsius, preparing for a Venus lander. Some extreme Swedish space technology. Swedes are quite good at traveling around in space. The Institute of Space Physics in Uppsala has made various instruments for spaceships like the Rosetta, the Mars Express, Venus Express, Cassini, the Huygens mission to Saturn, etc., and the Bepi Colombo on its way to Mercury. We've been around in the solar system, but wait, there's more. Okay, we intend to be working on Venus. The Royal Technical Institute is actually planning one or several Venus landers. And Venus is hot. Okay, it's not a nice place. The surface is 460 degrees. And rather than bringing a refrigerator onto the Venus surface, like the Russians did, why not let the environment come on in? It's okay. The electronics can take it, no problems. The atmosphere happens to be mostly carbon dioxide, and it's not harmful. Okay, let it come in. Let's accept that. The bowl-shaped object at the bottom of this image is a cutaway view of a Venus lander I thought out for the KTH Venus group. It must be able to stand and work and communicate and survive at the extreme temperatures and pressures at the Venus surface. But that's easy. The problem is getting it there, which we left for Christer Fuglesang to fix. What you need is spaceship on a chip. Having a lot of cabling at 500 degrees is cumbersome. It's problems. Copper can take it, but it's problems. So most of the spaceship's brain should be fitted onto one chip, like a typical enamel tile that you have in the kitchen, although it's made out of aluminum nitride. It's strong enough to withstand all the bumps of space travel and has the same thermal expansion rate as silicon carbide, so the chips won't pop off when the temperatures go off. You could even make a small asynchronous motor, flat as a pancake, that will work at 500 degrees, and that will be needed for spinning the mirror around so you can make panoramic images. It's going to be nice. But here on Earth, there are lots of hostile environments for electronics. Consider this gas turbine made by Siemens Industrial Turbo Machinery in Finspång. It started off as a Swedish company, but now it's a Siemens company. Okay, it outputs 30 megawatts of power for power generation. Fine, but it's hot inside. Anyway, you have to report temperatures, accelerations, vibrations, and stuff in there with electronics. And you have to get the data out of there. And it's a bit complex, but you can do it. 400 degrees, okay, we know we can do 400 degrees. Problem is the acceleration. The acceleration of a spinning turbine is something like 20,000 Gs. That's being shot out of a cannon. Okay, let's explain the hostilities. Inside there's 30 megawatts of heat. Most of it doesn't actually hit this microchips, but it's around there, and it's bloody hot. A gas turbine is a gas burner that is 6 meters long and accelerates gases up to supersonic speeds. The burners are 1300 degrees and clad with ceramics so not to disintegrate straight away. The gas temperature has fallen to some 800 degrees when it hits the turbine blades. That has to be verified by sensors. Fortunately, the temperature of the electronics is a mere 400 degrees at the turbine center. So that's where you put the electronics. But somehow telemetry must go out of this red-hot inferno. So how do you do that? The circuit package looks nice, blue and gold in this picture. But when it's working, it's glowing red-hot. All the bond wires that connect transistors to the circuit board are supported in the middle to prevent the wires from breaking or flying away at 20,000 Gs. Actually, electronics are frequently being shot out of howitzers and anti-aircraft guns. The Swedish arms manufacturer Bofors makes two kinds of electronic grenades. One is the Excalibur, which uses GPS navigation. It is shot out of a howitzer, and when it reaches the top of its trajectory, it extends fins and navigates through its target. In this way, it can be fired more or less at the target, and then maneuver to hit with 10-meter accuracy after traveling 50 kilometers. That's like shooting from here to Uppsala. The other one is the 3P grenade, pre-fragmented programmable proximity-fused ammunition. The grenade can be programmed to explode at impact or at radar contact. They have actually fitted a Doppler radar inside the grenade, a radar that survives 20,000 G plus acceleration. That's electronics. But we're in for another revolution, a civilian one. When you stick a gas turbine on an aeroplane, it's called a jet engine. Jets have been used many years without any possibility of extracting real-time data and getting it to the ground in real time. Instead, planes have been standing in hangars for frequent maintenance. It's expensive but necessary. An engine breakdown during flight would be much more expensive. It would seem better to transmit telemetry data from all the engines in the fleet in real time, rather than waiting for the plane to land or break down and try to understand the fault afterwards. Also, the new green fuels will need more management. One jet airliner will create some 25 megabytes of compressed data per day. That will result in some 3.8 terabytes per day from all the world's jetliners. It also translates to a steady 44.5 megabytes per second data stream that some communication satellites must continuously convey from the aircraft to the ground. Top this off with the supercomputer data mining needed to extract some significance out of the massive amount of collected data in real time. But stay cool, it will be profitable. Airline tickets will be cheaper. And now, some of the biggest switching power supplies of our time, and they're Swedish. Look at the ESS, the European Spallation Source. In southern Sweden, near the university city of Lund, buried in the rich soil of Skåne, will be the most powerful neutral gun ever built. Yes, finally Sweden will have something that is the biggest in the world. The ESS is the European Spallation Source, which will be up and running in 2020. Problem is, its transmitters are going to draw some 115 megawatts of pulses in 14 hertz. To not have the whole city of Lund blinking constantly at 14 hertz, the energy is stored in some really big capacitor banks, supplied by the most powerful switching supplier in history, even stronger than the one at CERN in Switzerland. Yes, they're big. Oh, they're big. The man in the picture at the bottom left is the project leader for the switching power supplies, and the power is off, so he's not dead. He is standing beside an 11 megawatt prototype. The blue thing in the background is the production model from CERN. The Swedish one is more powerful and much more efficient. It will be supplying 110 kilovolt to the transmitters, and there are a lot of transmitters in there. Right, there's one of them. Sweden is a forward nation when it comes to railways. Sweden was the first country ever to use electrified railways. This happened during the Second World War, when coal became scarce. Sweden does not have coal, and Swedish exports of iron became dependent on the price of coal for running steam locomotives. In stepped the Swedish manufacturer ASEA and electrified the export route, the Malmbanan railway line in northern Sweden. So we have some tradition in the field. The first ever thyristor-controlled railway engine, the RC locomotive, was made by ASEA starting in 1967. Some 366 of them were made, and it was an instant export success. Now the modern X55 train is finalized in Västerås, where the switchgear and traction motors are mounted, and they are big. They're really, really big. The switchgear is made by Bombardier Mitrak Power Lab in Västerås, which is a descendant of ASEA, or ABB as it's called nowadays. I've been there, sat in the driver's seat. Yes, it's nice. So silicon carbide is nothing less than a revolution for high power, high temperature electronics. It can do things that silicon can't, or at least a lot cheaper than silicon. Transistors that withstand some 30 kilovolts will undoubtedly revolutionize all sorts of power conversion, useful, for example, in electric power export and import. If we look away from the extremes, silicon carbide is also rad-hard, so it can be used in space, places where man dare not go, because he'd be dead right away. Right. Now for an encore. I'm speeding things up here. I'm going to talk about content delivery now. Content delivery to you. We were facing some time bandits. Let's talk a bit about techie news and some stuff that I've done. Sweden's real time, as we've heard earlier yesterday, was facing a breakdown because of insufficient computing power, insufficient network speeds, insufficient atomic clocks, and computers falling apart in general. Some clever people at Netnod understood this and started the NTP project. Sweden needed traceable real time. It was time for a change and new specification for a new system capable of standing the toughest DDoS attacks on the new fast networks, face fake time insertion, and most of all, to keep Sweden running in times of strife and isolation from the world around. If we no longer were able to contact the Bureau of Time and Measurements in Paris, we would need our own supply of proper time and frequency. A misalignment of a few microseconds might invalidate 1 million credit card transactions. Someone inserting fake time on the Swedish internet could seriously damage our industry and communications. So Netnod, Sunet, and me decided to do something about it, and we went to the United States to talk to some experts. I wrote the specification, Sunet built it, PTS paid for it, and Netnod now runs it. We have time. If you haven't noticed, I have written a few articles for Sunet's Fiber Fever blog on how to build, design, maintain optical networks. The blog explains most of the mysteries around optical networks, the magic, the snags, the wonderful optical components, and how to plan and build a countrywide network with as little effort as possible, getting it right the first time. Most network operators won't tell you about their inner workings, load figures and numbers, equipment sources and problems, whereas Sunet is completely open. I'm very happy to have been able to document the whole thing and having professors at various universities explaining the inner workings of microscopic optical components. All this I have brought to my readers in the hope that they will understand the wonder of optical networking. And the praise is coming in. Now, special for you. I thought you might like this. Now let's talk about some stuff I will do for you, and you're going to love it. Everyone has problems publishing deep techie news these days, and I will change that. My intention is to take your techie news and explain them in a pedagogic way so that most people will find them amusing and amazing and have them for a bedtime read. Long reads about complicated subjects is my specialty. The internet is full of short snippets. You can have them for free. Look at them, laugh at them, and forget them. But you will have gained nothing. No knowledge, no technology. Now, news items shorter than 140 words have been found incapable of conveying any meaningful information. My solution is quality. The Technicaliteter website will not use advertisements, as people hate them and will block them anyway. You're free to use an ad blocker, it will sit idle. A test version is or will be available at technicaliteter.se. Also, the Technicaliteter mag is still available at Netnod's web server, or yes. An early paper version with the same name, full of my articles, is still available at Netnod's website. The URL is at the bottom of this slide. It would give you some idea of how I'm working and thinking. Download all the hundreds of pages and have a good long read. You know me. So what can I do for you? Would you like to publish with someone who thinks your techie news, white papers, and press releases are more important than just a short 200-word snippet that no one will remember? Of course, we will be on the Facebook and all the other social media that you can't get around these days. So, what can I do? My motto is, all the fun technological stuff is not from California. Some of it is actually made in Sweden. Now let's hope this link works. Do you think it works? Didn't work? Well, there was a link. I don't know. It was a fun link. I can't show it to you. I promise you it was fun. Anyway, so being without that link, these are propaganda. My cards about this, about my website, and you can take them and you can drop your own card in exchange, and I will nag you when the site is actually online. Okay, I'll put them here. Okay, questions? Or are you just tired and want to go home?
Any questions for Jörgen?
Yes?
Okay, then if there are no further questions, please join me in thanking Jörgen for a very interesting presentation. Thank you very much, Jörgen.
Okay. Hope you at least enjoyed it.
Thank you. So,
Ja, just det. Ja, det är klart.
let's see. It's stopped working. There we go, back on. That's 19 presentations in less than 2 days. Some fantastic presentations, some very interesting discussion. It only remains for me to bring on the final person to close out the meeting, and that will be Karina Christiansen from Netnod. So Karina, please take the stage.
Thank you, Rob.
And welcome her to the stage.
And I have no slides, but I think we should all give Rob a really big applause for he has made sure that we've been on time, we've been on schedule, everyone's been introduced, and really kept these 2 days together for us. Then I would like to thank all of the Netnod team who's made this event possible. I run the marketing team, but obviously I couldn't have done it with the rest of the team and really the whole crew here because we're obviously not a very large company. Obviously a big thank you to Siri, who is our event manager and has really made sure that the venues, the social last night, everything is run smoothly. Siri. Alexander for making sure all our social media, presentations, etc. have been up on our website over these 2 days. Then, of course, our operations team, there's Henrik, Anders, we had from our engineering as well, we had Pierre, we've had Jörgen. It's been lots of people, Lehman, who were here all on Tuesday night, actually making sure we had internet working, we have power supplies, all these things that we, I guess, forget, but if they weren't here, we'd probably wonder where they were. All of the presentations from today should be available very shortly on our website. The actual video recordings will take at least a little bit longer to get up there. I know that LM's presentation from yesterday is up there already, if anyone wants to share that with their colleagues who couldn't make it. We also have Matte's session from this morning about our new services. That's also up there. Then also our short survey has been sent out. We really do appreciate your feedback so that we can keep improving these meetings and getting the feedback from you. And finally, not related to Netnod, I would like to remind all the Swedish operators who are still here that there will be a Swedish Operators Association meeting held in this room starting at 3:30. Just so you know that. It's not directly connected to Netnod, but then you know. So I wish everyone a really good trip back. Thank you to those who've been watching us online, and thank you to everyone who's still here. Have a great evening.